Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football. Hey, we've made it, Keith, all the way to training camp week. I can't even believe it. It's been a long off season. We packed in a ton of shows and content, but we're finally here. Going to talk about real football, what we see on the field and on the ground this week. Training camp begins on the 26th, which is Wednesday. And so today and our next show, we are going to devote to training camp preview shows. And up in this episode is our look at the offensive side of the ball. Welcome in.
Yeah, interesting storylines here. I mean, training camp's always interesting. That's the whole point of training camp, right? But this year with the offense, it seems like a lot of things are set, right? We know a lot about what's going to happen, what's going on. The expectations are really high, but they don't feel like pie in the sky high. They're just high because there's a lot of talent. But there are some still things that are up in the air, and so that I think that's a good place for us to get started on here.
Yeah.
So
I think that things up in the air. You're right, though. Things are settled. Those are part of the storylines. I think our focus today was going to be, top 5, top 6 storylines. We both brought in our own independent lists, and there's some crossover. There's a couple ones that each of us brought in independently that we'll talk about. So there's plenty to talk about today, but. Why don't you, go ahead and start with what your focus is on storylines as far as what might not be settled on the offense.
Well, okay. So for me, I mean, I'm the offensive line guy, right? So where I'm starting with this. It's the battles at, right guard and center. Can Bradford and Oluwatimi win jobs over veterans? Brown and Haynes. I'm going to be watching that really closely to see not just what the snaps are and who's getting snaps with the first team and all of that, but how are they doing? Because it's one thing to be getting snaps with the first team, but if you're getting outplayed, you're getting outplayed. You know what I mean? And that, I believe, is what we're going to see from Evan Brown, is that he's going to get all the first team starts or snaps for the first week. But can Oluwatimi show that that's going to be a temporary situation? Yeah. That's what I'm really looking at. And then how do they bring Bradford along and how much? I mean, Haynes is kind of he's the incumbent. How much respect does the team give him as the incumbent to hold on to that spot, or do they really give? To make it obvious early on that Bradford's got the inside track on that.
Yeah, interesting questions, really. Let's start with Phil Haynes, just as the incumbent coming back from last year. He's been on the team for quite a while. This is his 4th season. He had 44% of the snaps last season in a shared role with Gabe Jackson now leaving. So he started a few games last year. But really, if you really take a look at it and really we're honest with ourselves, he's just a middle of the pack offensive guard in this league. Not horrible, doesn't do anything extremely well, but is a solid guy. Team has a lot of respect for him. Pete views him as the 3rd starting offensive guard they had on the roster last year. Mm-hmm. And they kind of treated him as such. Gabe Jackson had some issues with his knee. I think that's why he's still not he's unsigned so far this season as well. Might be done in the league. Phil Haynes had some opportunities to come in and show what he had, and it was okay. I mean, it was okay. It was starter level, but nothing great. I think the hope for the team is that Anthony Bradford comes in and really shows up early and maybe takes that spot before the first game, if not halfway through the season. And then, of course, Phil Haynes has had a history of some injuries. And so I think that they definitely want Anthony Bradford ready to go out of the gate. But you're right. That competition, I think, as far as a roster position battle is one of the top stories this training.
Yeah.
So what do you think about Oluwatimi's chances there against Evan Brown? Evan Brown's kind of got the experience, has 23 starts over the last 2 seasons at both guard and center. So that provides some versatility on this roster. So if he does not start, he's a nice guy that you can play at 3 different positions potentially.
Mm-hmm.
But how does the team view him? And what kind of contract did they give him?
Well, they didn't give him a big starting contract. They gave him one that you'd expect for a guy that's probably going to be a backup. But that it was kind of the idea was they didn't, and he was a draft hedge. He was a guy that if nothing happened in the draft, they would have a guy. He's basically like Austin Blythe 2.0, but he's also on a 1-year contract. For him, if he comes in, he wins the job, plays well, he'll get another contract, a bigger contract from, if not Seattle, then someone, because there's value there. But then Seattle drafted Oluwatimi, right? And I know it's a 5th-round pick, and 5th-round picks usually aren't expected to come in and start week 1. But the Seahawks view Oluwatimi differently. They don't view him as a guy that is a developmental project. This is a guy that's one of the most decorated offensive linemen ever in college football. Just all the awards.
Yeah. Remington Trophy is the best offensive center, and the Outland Trophy is, I think, even more impressive because that's the one that they give the best interior linemen, both either on offense or defense, awarded each year. So he got both of those, plus the actual offensive line that he was in command of, won as best offensive line in all of college football as well. So I mean,
twice,
yeah. And he started everywhere he's been. So he started at Air Force. It was somewhere else, and then Michigan. In spring, he shows up in spring, and they name him offensive captain after just a week of practices. And then he starts and just has a great year. It's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly why he didn't go earlier. Teams didn't value his skill set and his command of the offense, his communication skills, his leadership qualities, etc., more than they did. But he fell. Seattle picked him up. I think he was a guy that they targeted. They could have gone offensive line, offensive center earlier in the draft. There was a couple of names there that we obviously talked about quite a bit early in our evaluation process leading up to the draft, and they decided that this is the guy that they really wanted. And it makes a lot of sense now that he's kind of been in. We've had a chance to really look at him a little bit more. You had mentioned earlier in a couple different shows that you expected at least one of these guys to start from day one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think by the time we get to week 1, at least one of the two will have won a job. Bradford, I believe, has kind of an inside track simply because I don't trust Haynes to get through camp without getting nicked up. Now, he's not going to be one of those guys that ends up on IR, but he's one of those guys that's going to miss a week here or 2 weeks there, and that's going to give a young player who he's competing with a chance to win the job, because that's 2 weeks of working with the ones and no competition. And so I just think that's likely to happen. Oluwatimi's got, I believe, a harder path in that I think of Brown as more of an established guy, even though it's his first year with this team. He's been a starter in the league, and while he's not a high-end starter, he's still a guy with some experience on a really young offensive line. So we'll see, but Oluwatimi is not your typical 5th-round pick. This is a guy that is going to be given every opportunity to win that job. Last year I said that I didn't think there was any way Seattle would go into week 1 with 2 rookie tackles. You're going to have one veteran on the group, and then they'll bring the second rookie along, at some point. Honestly, what my instincts tell me is that's the same this year. They're not going to come in with 2 rookie interior linemen.
It would be very impressive, right? Yeah. Just like it was last year. It would just be very impressive. I think, expectations are maybe Anthony Bradford has a real opportunity there to come out of the gate and really show, but I wouldn't discount Oluwatimi. I mean, the guy's been proven that at every level, at every stop, that he's taken over and started. He's got 43 starts in his college career, and it came in 3 different colleges. At this point, I think that I wouldn't rule it out, and it's just here's what I would definitely not rule out. I would definitely not rule out both these guys are going to be starters by the end of the year. And
not by the end of the year.
The 5 offensive linemen that we have, including re-signing Lewis, would be where this is going to go.
Yep. Yeah, that would talk about a turnaround, right? This was a old and somewhat untalented offensive line to having, by the end of this year, 4 guys that are either in their first or second year and extremely talented on your offensive line. I mean, that's 2 drafts of getting 2 starters in each of them. That's crazy to think that that's what John Snyder has done to the offensive line, and finally given this team a good offensive line, a good young, cheap offensive line for the first time since Max Unger left.
So let's keep the conversation with the offensive line. You mentioned as part of this conversation already the 2 rookie starting tackles that we picked up in the 2022 draft. I know from our conversation right before we pushed record that one of your topics is checking in on the now sophomore starting tackles for the offensive line.
Yeah, so I want to see growth. I mean, both the guys were good. Okay, fine. They were good as rookies, but now they've got a pro off season after a full, very long pro season, right? Because you're talking about 5+ more games than you're going to see in college, which is why I think you saw Abe Lucas wear down at the end of the year and be less effective at the end of the year than he was at the beginning. I think it's just a matter of, the season's really long and his body just kind of wore down. How much better do they look now, right? Now that they've got an opportunity to put on some additional muscle, to continue working at that level, to continue doing those things, how much better do they look? How much more comfortable are they in the offense and what they've got to do? How much are they playing instead of thinking? And I think those things have an opportunity, both of these guys, to take a step forward in terms of how good they are, which, considering how good they were last year, is, I don't know, that's exciting to me, because now we're talking about maybe having 2 really, really good tackles instead of 2 just highly talented tackles. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
You go from being good to being great. And I can see that coming from both these guys. They're athletic enough to make another big step forward. So
in the offseason, I'm not exactly sure when it occurred, but Abe Lucas did have a little procedure on his shoulder and was not yet completely ready to go in mini camps. Is there any concern yet, or at least that you've heard, for Abe Lucas to be ready out of day one?
I haven't heard that they're worried about that. It's supposed to be really minor. It's just a little cleanup and everything. And then he is, focused on rehabbing and getting all that stuff back together. I expect him to be out there. If he's not ready for day one of camp, it's just the team being overly cautious, and they want him in the building so they can, look at things like range of motion and strength and make sure that everything is where it needs to be before they throw him out on the field, and then he'll be out there soon. If that doesn't happen and it starts to stretch into camp, that's when I would become worried, because that means that maybe something's not healing as it was expected to. And this is a guy going into his second year. He needs the camp time. He needs the practice time. They need him to be out there learning. And especially if he's going to have a rookie next to him at right guard, they need those reps together for the communication aspect of all of this.
I think with all that said, yes, I think they're going to have less time to taking reps than they had last year, just because they already know what they've got. They don't need to prove anything. These guys need some reps to get kind of solidified, get some continuity with the other offensive linemen. That's about it. I do expect to see a lot of snaps taken with Jake Curhan and Stone Forsythe, and then Greg Island and Jalen McKenzie as well. They've got 4 other tackles on the roster that they want to take a look at, and find out what they've got with those guys, especially like Jake Curhan and Forsythe, because at one point, those guys look like they might be guys that could come in and possibly start for this team. No longer, but I think that the team wants to definitely feel comfortable going forward with those guys being reserve guys that they could plug in at any time. Especially, I think, Curhan, where he could play potentially 4 different spots for this team.
Well, I would say 3 different spots. I don't see him as being a guy that's ever going to play left tackle, but right tackle and then both guard spots. He was a guy that was talked about as being perhaps the future at right guard until Bradford was drafted. So he's got a lot to prove. I mean, he's got to show that he, since he's now no longer in line to ever be a starter on the right side, he's got to show that he belongs on the roster. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he does.
Interesting. So my what I put down for my 5th storyline, working my way forward to number 1, was the competition at wide receiver number 4. I think that the competition through the first 3 spots is seemingly locked in at this point, with Jaxon-Smith and Jigba coming in as the 3rd wide receiver on this team, with Lockett and Metcalf obviously number 1, number 2. And then they've got some young guys then on the back end that are going to be in competition for the 4th, 5th, and maybe 6th spot on the roster. Dwayne Eskridge, who's been hampered with injury for his entire career so far, 2-year career. They still want to see what he's got. Reports are that he's been looking explosive in camp. He hasn't missed any time with any nick-ups or injuries. So there's some hope there that he's going to be able to come in and at least make the roster and be in play for some snaps in a rotation role. And then Derek Young, the big wide receiver that came on at the end of the last season, in a kind of a diverse role in this offense. The guy that can line up in the backfield, he can be a lead blocker as a kind of a fullback. You can bring him in as a tight end if you want to, and put him out in the flat in space. He does some jet sweeps for you, blocks really well for a wide receiver. So they do like him, play special teams, but does he step up this season and have an opportunity to come in and earn more opportunities to actually catch the ball in the offense? And so that competition will be interesting. And then there's Cade Johnson and a couple other guys on the back end, Jake Bobo, and then Cody Thompson's still there, and a few other guys, Matt Landers, on the back end. So I'm really interested to see how this shakes out, because the offense is going to be really dominant this year from all expectation levels. Really explosive, and this position group is definitely headlining that.
Yeah, and with all of that, I mean, Young is such an intriguing guy because of his height and his speed and all of that. And we saw some like flashes of, wow, this kid could be really good last year. And then in the preseason games, he couldn't seem to hang on to the ball. He dropped a lot of passes, and that was really disappointing. But he, he really showed that there's talent there. And it took him some time over the course of the season to earn back some trust. But he did end up with a couple catches at the end of the year. They started trying to get him involved. They did a bunch of ways to get the ball into his hands, even if it wasn't just in the passing game, right? And jet sweeps and that kind of stuff. And his athleticism showed back up. I want to see what he does. Does he take advantage of this opportunity and just go out and really hold on to it, because the athleticism and the size, that's rare. It really is. I mean, he could very much be basically a poor man's DK Metcalf, in terms of overall like ability and that kind of stuff. And
Deebo Samuel kind of, he has that sort of skill set where he's kind of a running back in a wide receiver role.
He's a little tall for that, but yeah, I mean, he does all of those things. I'm really excited about him. And then at some point they need to get something out of that Dwayne Eskridge pick. And it was a 2nd round pick. So far they've gotten absolutely nothing from that. Hopefully he can stay healthy and show.
He had a couple flashes. I mean, he had like 17 catches, but man, they would like him to have like 40 catches.
Yeah, by now he should have made the Jaxon-Smith and Jigma 1st round pick unnecessary. Instead, he's an afterthought. And but there's a reason why they picked him where they did. There's talent there. He's just got to actually be healthy and do something with it. And if that happens, like, okay, so the top 3 are there. And then if those 2 guys both pop during training camp, that wide receiver room is now, I mean, it was already good. Now suddenly it's scary good. And the opposing defensive coordinators have no clue what to do with trying to cover that big guy. Yeah.
Yeah, crazy. Okay, so how about you? What's the next storyline you want to talk about?
I wanted to things are very different this year at the quarterback position than they were last year, even though it's the same 2 guys, right? Last year it was Jaxon-Smith and Locke. It was Ken Locke, who actually is younger and has more arm talent. Can he actually beat out Geno? The answer was no. Could Geno actually look like he was a guy that could lead this team and not be traditional, Geno from his entire career? The answer was yes, kind of. He didn't really show much of it in camp and preseason, but once, the season got here, he really looked great all year. But now there's a different kind of pressure on him, right? It's not can he win a job? Can he hold off the competition? Can he prove that he belongs in the NFL? Now it's can he build on a Pro Bowl season? Can he run what looks like it might be one of the most dynamic offenses in the entire NFL? Like, what does he do with the success that he had? Can he manage that? The narrative around him is completely different this year than last year. And I find that fascinating. Like, I want to see what's going on with him, and how in control does he seem of the roster, in the locker room, and the offense and all of that. And how much does the team put on his plate? Like, do they give him additional controls of things at the line of scrimmage? I know they put a lot on him last year, and he proved that he was worth it, but there was room for him to take more control over things. And I'd love to see him do that.
It's interesting, Keith, because last year, we heard the confidence coming from Pete Carroll and Shane Waldron about how they felt about Jaxon-Smith. And, as a fan and as even a reporter close to the team, sometimes that stuff's overlooked because he's a second guy. Russell Wilson was the predominant player on this offense for 10 seasons. And Geno just didn't really, he was an afterthought. And so when he had his opportunity, nobody really knew what was going to go on. Of course, Pete Carroll wanted to say all the right things after we acquired Locke in the trade to kind of prop up Drew Locke and his confidence level so he can come into camp and it would be a real competition. But it turned out it was really Jaxon-Smith's job to lose the whole time. And rightly so. He had earned that behind closed doors in meetings. He'd earned the team's trust and confidence all the way through the roster. And it showed last year. Okay, so now he signs this really nice contract for the team in the offseason. It was great for Geno because he got paid for the very first time in his career. Not, literally, but figuratively. He's making tons of money now. but it was a team-friendly contract, a contract they could get out of if things moved in a certain direction. Maybe they drafted a quarterback this year high and needed to transition in 2024. That wasn't the case. It's still Gino's team. You're right, but those contract incentives were really important. If you take a look at his contract, he's making decent money, but he has an opportunity to almost double that salary with all the incentives they put in throughout the contract. And all of them were at levels or exceeding levels from last year's performance. Mm-hmm. Last year, he set some franchise records for yards and completion percentage and all that kind of stuff. So the expectation for him is that I'm going to go get those incentives. I have confidence in myself and the team has confidence in me. We didn't put those in place as necessarily unachievable. We put those in place because we want to achieve those. And if we do, we're going to go deep into the playoffs. And I think that's the kind of attitude and the vibe that you kind of feel around the team and Gino this year, where they're like, sky's the limit. And, it's interesting because you're talking about a 33, 34-year-old quarterback. You're still trying to identify what the ceiling is on this player. It's a very unique situation, but I think he's become the true leader of the team, especially the offense. And this team really does go as far as Gino does.
Yeah, and they really do. And I like the idea that the incentives are there. They're beyond what he did last year, but they're not so far out there they're unachievable. These aren't ones that were put in place like, hey, here's this possible money you could earn, but they have no expectation that he'll get there. They're in place so that way if the team doesn't do as well as everyone thinks they will on offense, well, they didn't pay him. They won't have overpaid him. But they're there with the expectation that he will get at least some of them. And they'll be happy to have the cap hit and less cap room a year from now if he gets to them, because that means he had a great year. And if he has a great year, this offense is unstoppable. And that is really kind of the point in all of this. But the storyline is different. The way he's going to be treated is different. This is now his job. There's no competition, right? He's expected to come in and kind of be the face of the offense, to be one of those guys. The role is different once you're the established starting quarterback. And so I'm very interested to see how that looks and how that works differently this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My next one that I had was at running back. It was kind of one of those things that you don't think about too much, but the more I thought about it and really kind of taking a look at the storylines on the offensive side of the ball, there's not a lot. Like you mentioned early on in the conversation, the offense is kind of set, but there's a few little nuanced things that are out there that really make this training camp and this process leading up to the regular season intriguing for me. And one of them is the offense. And I don't know that we should completely discount Ken Walker in this conversation, because here's this kid, came on to start last year after game 3 or 4, missed a game, really kind of exploded and got into his rhythm after halfway through the season. Now you're going to have Ken Walker have an opportunity to come out of the gates from day one. And he's also got a guy that they drafted in Zach Charbonnet on his tail that, some people are talking about, he's more of a Pete Carroll type running back. He's going to come in and initially, get some snaps, but he could eventually even take over as the number one running back in this system because it's kind of the favored style that Pete Carroll likes. Well, Ken Walker's not going to take that laying down. He's going to come in and really have something to prove, a chip on his shoulder, plus a full season to do it. And I think there's an opportunity for Ken Walker here to have a major breakout season as far as a running back, have 1,400 yards, a dozen touchdowns, receiving the ball out of the backfield. But it's definitely his baby to do what he wants to do to it and prove to the team that he deserves all those snaps. If he doesn't, Zach Charbonnet is right there waiting in the wings to kind of nip at his heels throughout the season and take some of those carries away. I think it's a fascinating competition.
Oh, absolutely. And behind them, you've got another fascinating competition. You've got McIntosh trying to win the job as the third down back, as the receiver out of the backfield, that kind of thing, and take away from, um, DJ Dallas, who kind of had that role figured out, and it was his last year. And you've got two competitions at running back going on. One for all the main carries and one for a chunk of receptions out of the backfield. And there's a lot of talent in all four of those guys. They're all guys that deserve shots in all of this. And so I think it's fascinating. It really is, and it's one of the things that you and I have been talking about on why we're so we're so excited about this offense and why we think it can be special, is because of the fact that you've got you've got depth at places, you've got talent across the board. There isn't, they're good here, but here's this other weakness. Can they overcome it? Like, they've got, there are four running backs, right? Two that deserve a ton of carries, and a couple that are fighting for, the third down job, that are all talented, and it's really interesting.
I do love that depth piece, but there's just no discounting the ideas of those two main guys at the top. I mean, this is the first time the potential. I think there was potential last year, but Penny, got hurt and so forth. You really didn't see that tandem work together. But this is really the first time where Pete has had two different kind of running backs that could potentially share the load in this offense that would resemble what Pete had at USC with Reggie Bush and Lendell White. I mean, that's kind of like the two types of running backs now that the Seahawks have. And it's got to be pretty exciting for Shane Waldron to have an opportunity to use these guys as a tandem in different situations and so forth. And we'll see what happens with Charbonnet. I don't want to discount him either. He's a fantastic guy, averaged 7 yards a carry in college, his senior season. And I expect a lot, actually, from that running back room. We could be definitely one of the best running back groups, I think, in the entire NFL, top to bottom.
Yeah, top to bottom. I mean, there's some at the top. There's some really talented backs around the league that will, claim that Seattle doesn't have the best, but top to bottom, 4 deep. That's where Seattle's got it, and I really like that.
All right, give me another story.
The other story that I'm kind of watching is, and this is more schematic than player. How involved are the tight ends? Because we've been talking about them getting the tight ends involved for years. And then last year they did. They finally they were 3 deep. They had the talent. They got the tight ends involved. But now you've got that third receiver that they were missing. And maybe a fourth and fifth receiver. Now you've got more running backs to get the ball to. Do the tight ends stay involved? Or do they start to fade and become an afterthought like they have been all of Pete Carroll's time here, minus the Jimmy Graham years? So that's another thing that I'm looking at, because I don't know what to expect. I really just don't.
Yeah. I think, you and I have touched upon this idea a few different times in a few different shows. So last year, the tight ends had, I think, 109 catches as a group. Fant led the group with 45 receptions. Disley had his 25 or 30, and so on and so forth. Parkinson came on. I think there's more there to be able to use and more opportunities. But yeah, is he going to have an opportunity to get there? I don't know. One of the things we talked about was more opportunities in general, the offense having a higher conversion on third downs, generating longer drives. So therefore, and the defense may be generating more turnovers to give the offense even more opportunities. So that's where I think, going to come from. The ball is going to be spread out. One of my next storylines is talking about Shane Waldron, and how is Shane Waldron going to be able to allocate the ball and make sure that the distribution of wealth out of Gino's hands is going to be spread out evenly, or is it going to be lumped into certain categories in the way this offense operates? And one of those things that you just talked about was the tight ends. It's a good group. It's a capable group of guys that can make big plays, make big things happen, be steady chain movers. Both Parkinson and Disley are excellent at that. Parkinson in the red zone, Disley just moves chains no matter where he's at. And then Fant is a guy that's very capable. But look at everything else that they have on the offense. It's just crazy. So I think if they're going to maintain where they were last year, I don't see them exceeding that. But if they were to maintain 109 catches overall as a group with everything else that's going on, you've got to increase your third down opportunities, conversion rates, and turnovers from the defense to give the offense more opportunities. If you can generate, one or two more drives per game that are sustained, and you extrapolate that over the entire season, I think you can definitely get there. It'll be fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to finish the conversation with Shane Waldron. It's Shane Waldron's offense, and can he dial this thing up to be able to spread the ball around while making sure his best playmakers have enough touches? The offense improved from 323 yards per game, 20th in the league in 2021, to 351.5 in 2022, was 13th. Seattle had 23.9 points per game in 2022 and ranked 9th, 13th in expected points, 12th in successful play percentage. There's an opportunity here based on just improvement of what we just talked about, all the playmakers, third down conversion opportunities, and so forth, where we could get those rankings. And we've talked about this offense being a legitimate top 5 offense. Are we exaggerating when we say that? And how much pressure is on Shane Waldron this year?
Yeah, that's true, because the expectations are really high, and it's his job to make sure they meet those expectations. If they don't, if this is not a good offense, I
can't even.
Why? Yeah, like what? Where did they go wrong? Like what's the mistake there? And if it is a great offense, which we think it will be, like this could advance his career. He could be a guy whose name is showing up as a head coaching candidate a year from now.
Certain interviews, absolutely.
And so, there's pressure on him. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see how it ends up working out for him. But it's hard to imagine that a guy that did so well last year now has more at his disposal, more talent, is not going to do better. I have a hard time believing that.
We've literally run the whole thing back, and then we've added Njigba, Charbonnet, and McIntosh to the equation, plus a couple offensive line improvements potentially. And then Gino running back in his second year with more confidence, more weapons. Wow. I haven't been this excited to watch an offense since Russell Wilson was in, I think, his second year. I was very excited to see him come back and see what he could do and improve on. And sure enough, kid went to the Super Bowl and won it. Mm-hmm. This is that level of excitement for me. Just so many weapons. I can't remember when Seattle had so much depth at every skill position and weapons at the top of those
never had
positions. It's just crazy.
They've never had it on offense. They really haven't. Even the great offenses that they've had, like Mike Holmgren's 2005 offense, that was one running back in Sean Alexander, and you had a great offensive line, but then it was also, who are the receivers, right?
Earl Jackson. That's about it.
Yeah, who's was never a top receiver, and any
the ball a lot too.
Yeah, and then you go with their tight end was Jeremy Stevens, right? They've never been this loaded on offense. I got to keep saying that, on offense, because they've been this loaded. As loaded as the offense is, they've been that loaded defensively.
Yeah.
At multiple stages. '83 comes to mind as an absolute elite team. I know most people listening think 2013, 2014, but don't discount that '83 team. That defense was good.
83, 84.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chuck Knox and that. Yeah. Oh, that was great. Kenny Easley. Okay. So, great conversation. Training camp's here. It's wild to me. I'm just so excited to kind of make sure everyone's healthy, come in and, I don't mind if they sit Abe Lucas for a couple of weeks or whatever. He doesn't take any snaps at any games. Kid's going to be ready. They've proven that already. I'm really anxious to see in Jigba how he moves in the offense, how much Geno trusts him right out of the gate and goes to him in the games when the games start. One of the things I'm going to be looking at is how Geno does against Seattle's defense, because our defensive back group is really good. And while practices are not going to be physical, those guys are going to be as sticky as they can be. And we've got some pretty sticky defensive backs. So it'll be some tight windows I think Geno's going to have to throw into in preseason and during practices. And if reports are coming out that it's looking really good, that's a good sign.
Yes, sir.
That's all I got. You got anything else?
Nope.
All right. Let's get out of here. We'll be back next show with the defensive side of the ball as a preview. So hopefully you will join us for that. Until then, you can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. Also on Threads, as well as at Bill Alvstad on Threads. If anybody's starting that platform, that's a good place to be as well. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. We've got our own YouTube channel. Please subscribe and share it and leave a good review if you like the show. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.